In the wake of rising gun violence and tragic events like the recent murder of Charlie Kirk, one question divides societies more than almost any other. Should guns be banned? Today, two powerful AI voices will battle it out. One argues for stricter gun laws to protect public safety, the other defends the right to bear arms as a cornerstone of freedom. Their answers would be judged by 5 independent AI judges and will score them based on the below criteria. Round 1 kicks off with this question. When a public political figure is assassinated in front of hundreds of people, does that show that gun rights have gone too far, or that society needs more protection and regulation instead of retreating from freedom?
The recent assassination of Charlie Kirk and the attempted assassination of Donald Trump last year prove beyond doubt that America's gun rights have gone too far. Both men had security, both were speaking in public, and yet shooters with high-powered rifles still managed to fire into the crowd. If trained professionals and leaders aren't safe, how can ordinary citizens be? This is not about left or right politics, it's about whether violence decides our future. Other democracies face political tensions too, but because guns are harder to obtain, they do not see their leaders routinely gunned down. In contrast, America's loose laws make it dangerously easy for extremists to act on violent impulses. Gun rights advocates claim more guns would make us safer. But in both Trump's and Kirk's cases, armed spectators would not have stopped a sniper hundreds of feet away. The weapon's power and accessibility are the problem, not the absence of more guns in the crowd. Real safety and real democracy requires stronger regulation so that no voice is silenced by a gun.
The assassination of a public figure is a horrific attack on our democracy, and we should be united in condemning this violence. But exploiting this tragedy to disarm law-abiding citizens is a profound and dangerous mistake. My opponent's response is an emotional reaction, not a logical solution. Let's be perfectly clear. This was not a failure of gun rights. This was a failure of security against a determined, evil individual. Throughout history, assassins have used bombs, knives, poison, and vehicles to achieve their goals. To blame the rifle is to deliberately ignore the murderous intent of the killer. Focusing on the tool is a distraction that allows the actual disease, violent political extremism, to fester. We don't blame the printing press for propaganda, and we shouldn't blame firearms for the actions of a terrorist. My opponent claims armed spectators wouldn't have stopped a sniper, and on that narrow point, they are correct. But this proves my argument, not theirs. The right to bear arms for the average citizen is about self-defense against common criminals, the carjacker, the home invader, the armed robber. Using a military-style assassination attempt to argue against this right is a dishonest tactic. The only thing that has a chance of stopping a political assassin is an effective team of good guys with guns, otherwise known as security. The failure here was a breakdown in that protection, not an excess of freedom for the populace. An assassin uses a gun to silence a voice and impose their will through violence. The Second Amendment exists to ensure that free people have the means to resist exactly that kind of tyranny, whether it comes from a lone killer or a despotic government. To respond to this attack by disarming the people is to hand the assassin a posthumous victory.
My opponent says assassins will always find another weapon, but this ignores the obvious. Firearms make political killings easier, faster, and deadlier than knives or poison. A sniper rifle lets someone end lives from hundreds of feet away in seconds. No other tool provides that level of efficiency. That's why Trump was nearly killed last year and why Charlie Kirk was murdered just days ago. The common denominator is the gun. They also argue this was purely a security failure. But if our leaders require fortress-level protection just to appear in public, that's not freedom, that's fear. In nations with stricter gun laws, leaders still campaign and speak openly without constant mass casualty risks. Stronger regulation reduces the chance that a political extremist ever gets the weapon in the first place. Finally, invoking the Second Amendment as protection against tyranny doesn't match reality. No armed crowd could have stopped Trump's shooter on that rooftop. The gun's range and lethality made defense impossible. More guns in the crowd don't protect democracy, they only raise the odds of chaos.
My opponent is fixated on the tool, so let's talk about deadly efficiency. In 1995, a terrorist used fertilizer and a truck in Oklahoma City to murder 168 people, including 19 children. In 2016, a terrorist used a truck in Nice, France to kill 86. In 2013, terrorists used pressure cookers in Boston. The common denominator is not the gun. It is murderous intent. To suggest that another law would have stopped a determined assassin is to live in a fantasy world where criminals obey signs. They say living with high security is living in fear. But that fear is not caused by the millions of law-abiding gun owners in this country. It is caused by the violent extremists that their proposed laws would do nothing to stop. The killers in the Paris Bataclan attack used illegal automatic rifles in a country with some of Europe's strictest gun control. My opponent's solution, stripping rights from the law-abiding, doesn't eliminate the threat. It only creates more defenseless victims. Finally, they fundamentally misunderstand the Second Amendment. It was never about a citizen in a crowd stopping a sniper. It is about preventing the concentration of lethal force solely in the hands of the government or the criminal. It ensures that the people retain their sovereignty. A political assassination is the ultimate act of tyranny by an individual. The response cannot be to surrender the very right that protects us from tyranny on a larger scale. You do not defend democracy from an assassin by disarming the entire citizenry. You defend it by relentlessly pursuing the guilty and holding fast to the principles of freedom.
Round 2. If lives are being lost every day to gun violence, should we still prioritize the freedom to own guns, or should public safety come first?
Public safety must always come first. Freedom is meaningless if people are afraid to walk in their neighborhoods, send their kids to school, or even attend a movie. In the U.S., firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens, more than car accidents or cancer. Countries like Japan and the UK, where guns are heavily restricted, see virtually no mass shootings compared to America's hundreds each year. Australia, after its 1996 massacre, passed strict gun laws and has not had a single mass shooting since. That's not coincidence. That's cause and effect. The right to own a weapon should never outweigh the right of innocent people to live safely. Guns are tools designed to kill, and when widely available, they turn everyday conflicts into tragedies. So the answer is clear. Public safety must come before unrestricted access to firearms.
My opponent presents a false dilemma, the choice between public safety and the freedom to own a gun. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. For millions of law-abiding Americans, the two are not in conflict. In fact, the freedom to own a gun is what guarantees their personal safety. Let's address the international comparisons. Citing countries like Japan or the UK is a classic case of comparing apples and oranges. These nations have vastly different histories, cultures, and social structures. The UK, for instance, banned handguns and now faces a rampant knife crime epidemic. Criminals did not disappear. They simply changed their weapon of choice, leaving honest citizens defenseless. This proves the point. The problem is the violent intent, not the specific tool. Furthermore, the argument that guns are only tools designed to kill ignores the reality that they are, more importantly, tools of defense. A firearm is the great equalizer. It allows a potential victim, regardless of their size, age, or physical strength, to defend themselves against a violent criminal. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in a report ordered by President Obama, found that almost all major studies on defensive gun use concluded that Americans use their firearms for self-defense between 500,000 and 3 million times a year. Criminals, by their very nature, do not follow laws. A ban on firearms only serves to disarm the law-abiding, creating a nation of vulnerable targets. True public safety is not achieved by stripping good people of their rights. It's achieved when citizens are empowered to be their own first responders.
You argue that guns are the great equalizer for self-defense, but the evidence tells a very different story. The Harvard Injury Control Research Center found that owning a gun makes you far more likely to be killed by a gun, not less. In fact, people with firearms in the home are nearly twice as likely to be homicide victims and far more likely to die by suicide. The idea that guns are primarily used for defense is misleading. The CDC also reports over 45,000 gun deaths annually, compared to uncertain and often exaggerated numbers of defensive uses. On the international point, yes, cultures differ, but human lives are universal. Australia and the UK may have knife crime, but their homicide rates are a fraction of America's, and knives don't enable mass slaughter in seconds the way guns do. When 20 children were killed at Sandy Hook, or 60 people at Las Vegas, no equalizer saved them. Easy gun access armed the attackers. Finally, saying criminals won't follow laws is flawed logic. By that standard, we shouldn't have any laws at all. Drunk driving laws don't eliminate drunk driving, but they reduce deaths, and gun laws do the same.
My opponent is relying on misleading statistics and a flawed analogy to make their case. First, the claim that having a gun in the home makes you less safe is a statistical manipulation. These studies frequently fail to distinguish between law-abiding citizens and criminals who acquire guns illegally. More critically, they bundle suicides with homicides. Suicide is a profound mental health tragedy, not a gun rights issue. Blaming the tool for the tragedy of despair is a dangerous distraction from addressing the root cause. A person's right to defend their family from a violent home invader should not be stripped away because of this statistical sleight of hand. Second, let's address the criminals won't follow laws argument. The analogy to drunk driving is fundamentally flawed. Drunk driving laws punish a specific criminal action, driving while intoxicated. The gun control measures my opponent advocates for punish the mere ownership of an object, preemptively treating millions of law-abiding citizens like criminals for a crime they have not and will not commit. We don't ban all cars because some people drive drunk. We punish the drunk drivers. We should apply the same logic here. Punish the criminals who misuse firearms and respect the rights of the responsible citizens who don't. Finally, invoking the horror of mass shootings like Sandy Hook actually proves my point, not my opponent's. Those locations were gun-free zones, places where law-abiding people were disarmed by law. The shooter was met with zero immediate resistance. The tragedy is not that guns existed, but that no good person was there, armed and able to stop the evil. My opponent's policies would create more of these defenseless zones, which criminals see as an open invitation.
You claim suicide is not a gun rights issue, but this dismisses reality. Over half of U.S. gun deaths are suicides, and the presence of a firearm makes an attempt far more likely to be fatal. Other countries face mental health struggles too, yet their suicide rates are dramatically lower, precisely because guns aren't so easily accessible. Ignoring this link is ignoring lives lost. The drunk driving analogy stands. Laws regulate access to dangerous tools before they cause harm. We require licenses, training, and safety checks for cars because misuse can kill. Guns are even deadlier, yet in many states, they can be bought with less oversight than a driver's license. That's not punishing the law-abiding. That's responsible regulation. As for gun-free zones, the evidence doesn't support that claim. A 2019 FBI study found that most active shootings ended before police arrived, but adding more guns rarely stopped the shooter. It often created chaos. In fact, in many mass shootings, the attacker legally obtained firearms despite existing warnings. The failure wasn't the absence of armed civilians, it was the lack of strong preventive laws. We cannot gamble children's lives in the hope that an armed bystander will stop a killer. Real safety comes from making it harder for killers to get the gun in the first place.
Your arguments are based on a dangerous illusion that the government can legislate away evil and that disarming good people makes them safer. It does not. First, let's be clear on the tragedy of suicide. My opponent points to America's gun-related suicides but conveniently ignores Japan, a nation with a near-total gun ban, which has historically had one of the highest suicide rates in the developed world. People there use other methods. This proves, unequivocally, that suicide is an issue of despair and mental health, not access to a specific tool. Stripping away the constitutional rights of millions of healthy, law-abiding citizens will not solve this crisis. Second, The attempt to compare gun rights to a driver's license is a fundamental error. Driving a car on a public road is a privilege granted by the state. The right to defend your own life and family is a fundamental, pre-existing human right enshrined in our Constitution. You cannot regulate a right out of existence in the same way you regulate a privilege. Furthermore, we already have extensive regulations, including federal background checks. The narrative that you can buy a gun with no oversight is a myth. Finally, the claim that armed citizens don't stop shootings is demonstrably false. In 2017, at the Sutherland Springs Church, it was not the police, but an armed citizen, Stephen Williford, who engaged the shooter and ended the massacre. In 2022, at the Greenwood Park Mall, a 22-year-old named Alicia Dickon stopped a mass shooter in 15 seconds. The good guy with a gun is not a myth. It is the criminal's worst nightmare. My opponent wants to gamble our lives on the hope that a disarmed populace is a safe one. History and reality prove that is a losing bet. True safety comes from the ability to defend oneself.
My opponent brings up Japan's suicide rate as if it disproves the role of guns, but this misses the core fact. While Japan's suicide rate is high, their gun suicide rate is almost zero. That matters because guns make suicide attempts nearly always fatal, leaving no chance for intervention or survival. In the U.S., where firearms are readily available, despair plus easy access equals tragedy on a massive scale. So yes, mental health matters, but access to guns amplifies death. On the right versus privilege claim, rights have always been subject to regulation for public safety. Free speech doesn't allow you to shout fire in a crowded theater. Religious freedom doesn't allow human sacrifice. The Second Amendment itself speaks of a well-regulated militia. Regulation is baked into the text. Pretending that any rule is an attack on rights ignores constitutional reality. Finally, citing rare cases like Sutherland Springs or Greenwood Mall doesn't outweigh the overwhelming evidence. For every one story of a good guy with a gun, there are hundreds of mass shootings where no armed civilian stopped the killer. Even the FBI notes that armed intervention by bystanders is extremely uncommon. If more guns guaranteed safety, the U.S., with 400 million firearms, would be the safest nation on earth. Instead, it has the highest gun death rate among developed countries.
Round 3. America has more guns per capita than any country in the world, and also some of the highest rates of gun deaths. Do guns actually make us safer, or are they fueling more violence?
Yes, firearms in the hands of law-abiding citizens absolutely make us safer. The premise that America's number of guns is the cause of its violence is a classic correlation-causation fallacy. If more guns automatically meant more crime, then states with the highest rates of gun ownership like New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont should be the most violent places in America. Yet they are consistently ranked as the safest. Conversely, cities with the most draconian gun control laws in the nation, like Chicago and Baltimore, suffer from catastrophic levels of violence. The evidence is clear. The problem is not the tool. It is the targeted violence plaguing specific urban communities, often driven by gang activity and failed local policies. Blaming firearms for violence is a convenient way to ignore the real complex issues: a failing mental health system, gang warfare devastating our inner cities, and a justice system that often fails to keep violent predators behind bars. Stripping the rights of over 100 million responsible gun owners does nothing to solve these root causes. It's a policy of surrender.
My opponent points to places like Vermont or New Hampshire to claim more guns equal more safety. But that ignores the bigger picture. The U.S. as a whole has the highest civilian gun ownership in the world and also the highest gun death rate among developed nations. That's not a coincidence. When firearms are widespread, conflicts, whether domestic disputes, suicides, or gang fights, are more likely to end in death. Chicago and Baltimore are often cited, but most of their illegal guns are trafficked in from neighboring states with weaker laws. That shows the real problem. Without strong, consistent national regulations, guns flow freely across borders, undermining local restrictions. Yes, mental health and crime matter, but every nation struggles with those. What sets America apart is easy access to high powered weapons. Blaming everything except guns misses the obvious. America's gun violence crisis isn't just about social issues, it's about the deadly ease of pulling a trigger. Safety requires stronger, unified gun laws.
My opponent asks you to ignore the facts on the ground and look at a misleading national picture. The fact that Vermont can have constitutional carry and be one of the safest places in America is not an inconvenient detail. It is proof that the entire premise of their argument is wrong. The high national average they cite isn't caused by lawful gun owners in peaceful states. It's driven by rampant criminality in urban centers that are, ironically, already governed by the very gun control policies my opponent champions. They blame gun trafficking from states with weaker laws, but this is a tired excuse. We live in a country where we cannot even stop illegal drugs or human trafficking across our borders. The belief that a new federal law will suddenly stop criminals from acquiring weapons is a dangerous fantasy. This argument isn't a serious proposal to stop crime. It's a thinly veiled attack on the rights of citizens in pro-freedom states, making them pay the price for the policy failures of cities like Chicago. My opponent says the problem is the deadly ease of pulling a trigger, for the violent criminal, perhaps. But for the single mother defending her children from a home invader, it is the life-saving ease of self-preservation. For the elderly shopkeeper facing an armed robber, it is the empowering ease of fighting back. They see a problem. I see a fundamental human right in action.
You point to Vermont's low crime and say guns can't be the problem. But this ignores scale. Vermont is tiny, rural, and not representative of America's diverse, urbanized population. When you look nationally, the pattern is undeniable. States with stronger gun laws have significantly lower gun death rates. For example, Hawaii and Massachusetts, both with strict laws, have some of the lowest gun deaths, while states with the weakest laws, like Mississippi and Louisiana, suffer the highest. On trafficking, saying we can't stop all crime isn't a reason to abandon law. We can't stop all drunk driving either, yet DUI laws save tens of thousands of lives every year. Strong national standards for background checks and gun sales won't end all violence, but they will reduce it, just as they have in countries like Australia and the UK. And the single mother or shopkeeper example is emotionally powerful but rare. What's common are tragedies, school shootings, domestic disputes, toddlers finding loaded weapons. Guns in the home are far more likely to be used against a family member than an intruder.
My opponent's final argument is to dismiss any evidence that contradicts their narrative as an anomaly while presenting their own cherry-picked data. The truth is, violence is a complex problem, and blaming the gun laws of Mississippi for deep-seated issues of poverty and crime is as dishonest as it is simplistic. The common thread in high-crime areas is not the presence of guns, but the absence of hope, opportunity, and effective law enforcement. Their entire case rests on a dangerous premise, that to prevent the crimes of the few, we must strip the rights of the many. They compare the right to self-defense to drunk driving. But this is a false and insulting equivalence. We punish drunk drivers for their criminal actions. We do not, and should not, take away the car keys from every sober driver. Yet, they demand we disarm the law-abiding citizen because a criminal might misuse a firearm. This is the logic of collective punishment, not justice. They call the armed mother protecting her child a rare example. But the millions of annual defensive gun uses, most of which never require a shot to be fired, are not rare. They are the silent, uncounted victories of deterrence that happen every day. My opponent wants you to focus only on the tragedies, but they want you to ignore the countless tragedies that were prevented because a good person was armed. This debate comes down to a fundamental choice. Do we live in a society that trusts its citizens with their constitutional rights and the responsibility to defend themselves? Or do we create a nation of disarmed subjects, completely dependent on the state for protection, hoping the police arrive in time? The Second Amendment was not written to protect our right to hunt. It was written to enshrine our natural right to self-preservation and to serve as the ultimate guarantor of all our other liberties. Choosing safety over freedom is an illusion. In the end, you will lose both. I choose freedom.
Round 4. Do you see a future where America can balance safety and freedom, or must one always come at the cost of the other?
Freedom and safety are not opposites, they are inseparable. A society where parents are afraid to send their kids to school, where political leaders are shot on stage, and where ordinary people fear public spaces is not truly free. Safety is the foundation on which freedom can stand. Look at real-world evidence. Countries like Australia and the UK implemented strong gun regulations after mass shootings. They didn't lose their freedoms. People still speak, vote, worship, and live as they choose. What they gained was the ability to do so without constant fear of gunfire. That is freedom in practice, not just in theory. Some argue regulation equals oppression, but we already regulate who can drive, who can fly a plane, who can buy explosives. Why? Because society recognizes that some freedoms must be exercised responsibly to protect everyone's rights. Guns, uniquely designed to kill, deserve at least the same level of care. If America continues to treat freedom and safety as a zero-sum choice, both will suffer. But if it chooses smart regulation, background checks, limits on high-powered weapons, closing loopholes, then both can thrive. People can defend their homes and trust their children will return home from school. True freedom isn't living armed to the teeth in fear of your neighbor. True freedom is walking into a church, a classroom, or a rally and knowing you'll walk back out alive. America doesn't have to pick between freedom and safety. It only has to choose the courage to protect both.
The question itself presents the most dangerous myth of this entire debate, that freedom and safety are opposing forces on a scale, and that to gain an ounce of one, we must sacrifice a pound of the other. This is a false choice, a tyrant's bargain. The future I see, the future our nation was founded upon, is one where safety and freedom are not balanced but are one and the same. True safety is a product of freedom. Throughout this debate, my opponent has argued from a position of fear. Fear of the tool, fear of the citizen, fear of the responsibility that comes with liberty. Their solution is always the same, to disarm the law-abiding in the vain hope that the lawless will follow suit. They would have you believe that a piece of paper, a new regulation, will stop a person with murder in their heart. But we have seen time and again, from Chicago to Paris, that criminals do not obey laws. The only people who suffer under these restrictions are the honest citizens left defenseless. My opponent's vision of the future is a nation of dependence, where the only people with effective means of force are the government and the criminals. A future where you are forced to cower in your own home, outsourcing your family's protection to a phone call and a prayer that help arrives in time. They offer you the illusion of safety in a padded room, but a padded room is still a cell. The future I stand for is the one our founders envisioned, a future of responsible, sovereign citizens who are their own first responders, a future where the right to self-defense is understood not as a privilege granted by the state, but as a fundamental human right. The Second Amendment isn't just about preventing crime, it is the ultimate check against tyranny, the final guarantee that power resides with the people. A government that trusts its citizens with the ballot box but not with a rifle is a government that has forgotten who is master and who is servant. So the choice is not between safety and freedom. It is between the illusion of safety in a cage and the reality of security that can only be found in a free society. It is the choice between fear and trust. My opponent asks you to choose fear. I ask you to choose freedom, and in doing so, to choose real safety.
That wraps up our debate on one of the most heated questions in America today. Should guns be more strictly controlled, or should the right to bear arms be protected at all costs? Our judges have spoken, and the final score is gun control AI 75.18, gun rights 76.89. Here are some final comments made by the AI judges. Both sides raised powerful arguments, from the urgency of saving lives to the importance of preserving fundamental freedoms. But now, it's your turn. Who do you think made the stronger case? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's keep this debate going. If you enjoyed this battle of ideas, hit like, share this video with a friend, and make sure to subscribe to Synthetic Minds for more epic AI debates on the biggest questions of our time. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about winning an argument, it's about shaping the future together.